Preston Whitmore had known loss before, but nothing prepared him for the quiet collapse that swallowed his life at 53. Once a celebrated architect whose name circulated at industry conferences and appeared in glossy magazines, he had been praised for resurrecting forgotten buildings and restoring them to life. But admiration didn't pay bills when a global financial crisis crushed the firm he had given 15 years to. His marriage, worn thin by long hours and divided priorities, dissolved shortly after. Job prospects dried up. His savings bled away. Finally, he found himself in a cramped studio with stained ceiling tiles and an eviction notice that felt like a death sentence. Then, on a Tuesday morning, as if delivered by fate itself, a letter arrived. Heavy paper, wax seal, the unmistakable scent of old wealth. It spoke of an inheritance, an ancestral property named Ravencrest Castle in a remote European highland village. The attorney's tone was apologetic. Disrepair, superstitions, heirs who refused to claim it. Yet as Preston sat on the floor surrounded by empty shelves and unpaid bills, the idea of a cursed castle seemed almost comforting compared to homelessness. With only $417 left to his name and no future in sight, he packed a single suitcase, bought a one-way ticket, and stepped into a life he never expected, driven by equal parts desperation and the faintest spark of curiosity about the family he never knew. Ravencrest Village greeted him like a place suspended in time, a cluster of timber-framed buildings huddled beneath the shadow of the mountains. The villagers watched him with the quiet curiosity of people who rarely encountered outsiders, and even less often welcomed someone claiming ownership of the ancient castle looming above them. Gregor Sundberg, the local attorney, reviewed the inheritance documents with a seriousness that bordered on pity. He warned Preston that previous heirs had visited only briefly before abandoning the property entirely. Stories clung to the castle's reputation: strange lights, unexplained noises, disappearances in the distant past. The innkeeper, Ingrid, spoke of her grandmother hearing living sounds from the lower levels, sounds not meant for human ears. Yet none of it deterred Preston. After losing everything, fear had become a luxury he could no longer afford. At dawn, he began the climb to Ravencrest Castle. The structure rose from the fog like a fortress from a Gothic painting, weathered stone, clawed towers, iron gates hanging crookedly. Inside, dust thickened the air, portraits watched with faded eyes, and the silence felt heavy enough to press against the skin. But beneath decay, Preston sensed potential. The architect in him assessed each room instinctively, cataloging what could be restored. He wandered through forgotten corridors until he found the study, a room that felt too small for its exterior footprint, a room that whispered of secrets waiting just behind its walls. And for the first time in months, he felt the stirring of purpose. Preston's discovery began with a mismatched measurement, 3 missing feet of interior space that shouldn't have existed. His experienced eye scanned the study until he found a carved rosette in the molding, worn more than the wood around it. When he pressed it, something deep in the wall clicked. The massive bookshelf swung outward silently, revealing a stone staircase descending into darkness. Pulse hammering, Preston took a lantern and stepped into the unknown. The air grew cooler as he descended 43 steps into a subterranean corridor lined with precisely fitted stone. This was no crude cellar. This was engineering. The corridor led to a chamber preserved in astonishing detail, a naturalist's laboratory from the early 1700s. Brass instruments, delicate glassware, anatomical sketches, and dozens of leather-bound journals rested undisturbed. Preston opened the earliest entry and read about Cornelius Ashford, his ancestor, who had dedicated his life to saving species rapidly vanishing across Europe. Long before conservation was a recognized science, Cornelius built a sanctuary beneath his own home, determined to preserve life against human greed and environmental collapse. The journals described the capture of 6 pairs of European crested ibis, a species extinct for over a century. Cornelius documented their behavior, breeding, and care with meticulous devotion. But the most startling detail lay in the final entries. He had sealed chambers beyond the laboratory, each containing living habitats for rare animals. Preston felt the air thicken with possibility. If Cornelius's systems had endured, if any species were still alive down here, then Preston had stumbled into a responsibility far greater than he had imagined, and one he was utterly unprepared to face. The iron door at the far end of the laboratory bore a Latin warning, Custodi Vivens, guard the living. Preston hesitated only a moment before lifting the brass key from its case. With trembling hands, he drew back the bolts and opened the door. What greeted him defied logic. A vast aviary stretched beyond the threshold, illuminated only by faint ventilation shafts high in the ceiling. Branch perches, nesting alcoves, and water channels formed an ecosystem frozen in time. And on those perches, alive and alert, were birds thought extinct for more than 100 years. Their emerald and bronze plumage shimmered softly, their eyes reflecting his lantern light with an intelligence that unsettled him. European crested ibis, at least 20 of them, watched with calm curiosity. Preston sank to his knees. The existence of even one would have been miraculous, but this was an entire surviving colony, thriving in carefully engineered seclusion. He examined the infrastructure: grain storage drums, water filtration, ventilation shafts channeling air from above. Cornelius had not built a temporary shelter. He had built a self-sustaining sanctuary capable of operating without human intervention for centuries. Yet the grain reserves were nearly depleted. The birds had survived, but barely. Preston realized with a sense of awe and terror that their future now depended entirely on him. He was the last heir, the last link in a chain that had protected this secret for generations. And whether he wanted it or not, he had become their guardian. Over the next days, Preston immersed himself in Cornelius's journals, piecing together the sanctuary's systems and the intention behind its design. By day, he explored deeper passages, discovering chambers that once housed wolves, eagles, and small mammals, habitats now long empty. Their failures weighed heavily on him. Only the ibis had endured the long silence following the last caretaker's death in 1962. Preston's heart ached with equal parts wonder and dread as he realized how close the entire sanctuary had come to collapse. Determined to repay the faith placed in him by time and bloodline, he began repairing the infrastructure, hauling supplies from the village and constructing new feeding stations. That was when he met Margit Lindgren, a sharp-eyed elderly woman who introduced herself as the village librarian and, to his surprise, a distant descendant of Cornelius's daughter. She revealed that her family had maintained knowledge of the sanctuary for generations, passing down notes, stories, and feeding instructions. Her grandfather had been the last guardian before his sudden death. She had believed the sanctuary lost until Preston revived it. When he revealed the surviving ibis, her eyes filled with tears. Together, they began restoring the ecosystem, studying the birds, and learning to provide proper care. For the first time since the collapse of his old life, Preston felt a shared purpose, a bridge between past and future. But the sanctuary was only the beginning, and the secrets beneath Ravencrest Castle ran deeper than either of them knew. Their delicate equilibrium shattered with the arrival of Quentin Aldridge, a wildlife photographer and conservation researcher whose curiosity threatened everything. He appeared in the village asking pointed questions about the Ashford family's unusual shipping records from centuries past. Preston and Margit observed him carefully. His credentials were impressive: 30 published papers, expeditions across the world, but desperation clung to him. A divorce, medical bills, bankruptcy. Men burdened by loss could be unpredictable, yet his passion for endangered species seemed genuine, even noble. After days of debates and sleepless nights, Preston made a daring decision: test Aldridge's character. Under strict conditions, no cameras, no notes, complete confidentiality, Preston led him down the hidden staircase. Aldridge's reaction to the aviary was immediate and overwhelming. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he whispered the species' name like a prayer. He inspected the sanctuary not with the hunger of a man seeking fame, but with the reverence of someone who had spent a lifetime mourning extinction. He spoke logically and urgently of genetic bottlenecks, sustainable breeding programs, and the need for modern conservation frameworks. Yet he respected their secrecy, recognizing the dangers if the world learned too soon. For the first time, Preston glimpsed the possibility of partnership, not just between himself and Margit, but among people capable of expanding Cornelius's legacy far beyond the castle walls. Still, trust, once extended, could never be taken back. The sanctuary's true magnitude revealed itself when Margit produced a silver key passed through her family for generations. It opened 3 sealed chambers deeper within the complex. In the first, they found a living family of Iberian lynx, one of the rarest felines on Earth, lean but healthy, surviving through a self-contained ecosystem that had adapted to the ventilation system's influx of small prey. In the second chamber perched two ancient Spanish imperial eagles, their feathers dulled with age, yet their eyes fierce with the dignity of survivors. The final chamber was not a habitat but an archive, Cornelius's greatest achievement. A climate-controlled genetic library stretching back centuries, filled with seeds, tissues, and biological samples from species lost to time. Cornelius had understood something profound. If he could not save them alive, he could save the essence of their existence, waiting for an era capable of resurrection. Aldridge was speechless as he examined the archive. The potential was staggering: restoration of ecosystems, revival of species, scientific advancements beyond imagination. But such knowledge, mishandled, could unleash greed, exploitation, and political battles capable of destroying everything. The sanctuary was no longer merely Preston's inheritance. It was a responsibility that spanned generations, demanding protection not only from nature's decay, but from humanity's ambition. And now, with multiple species alive and a genetic library that could reshape the world, the question facing them was no longer what had survived, but what they should do next, and whom they could truly trust with the answer. In the days that followed, the three formed an uneasy alliance as they mapped out the future of the sanctuary. Aldridge brought scientific expertise, Margit brought historical legacy, and Preston brought the structure and stability needed to preserve the castle itself. Yet their discussions always circled back to the same dilemma: whether the world was ready for knowledge of this magnitude. To reveal the sanctuary prematurely would invite governments, corporations, collectors, and scientific institutions, each hungry to claim ownership. To hide it forever risked losing the chance to restore what humanity had destroyed. One morning, while watching Percy, the dominant ibis, gentle his mate as she tended their newly laid eggs, Preston finally understood what the castle had been teaching him. Preservation was not about heroism or secrecy. It was about stewardship. Courage was not in hoarding knowledge, nor in surrendering it blindly, but in choosing the path that ensured survival beyond ego, beyond legacy, beyond a single lifetime. With quiet conviction, Preston made his decision. They would strengthen the sanctuary, build a network